I know who you are, sir.
Your preferred table is ready now if you'd like to move.
In this city, being a black woman in a white apron makes you invisible. They think I'm just refilling water, but they forget that ears don't have a color, and mine have traveled the world. When the man in the silk suit leaned in and whispered in Korean, "The king dies at midnight by his queen's hand," he didn't realize the waitress understood every word. The air conditioning in the Gilded Crane was set to a biting surgical chill, but at table 7, the heat of a slow-motion execution was radiating off the velvet chairs. I moved with the practiced rhythmic silence of a shadow, the heavy crystal water pitcher sweating in my palm. My eyes were down, fixed on the floor's polished marble, but my mind was a high-resolution camera, mapping the carnage masked by high-fashion suits. Kim Dong-Jik was a man being dismantled from within. Even through his impeccably tailored charcoal suit, I could see the signs of systemic collapse. His breathing was shallow, a heavy labored whistle that spoke of high blood pressure and a heart straining against an invisible tide. When he reached for his cup, I noticed his fingers were puffy, the gold signet ring on his pinky biting into skin swollen from fluid retention. Most damning of all were his eyes. When the light hit them, the sclera didn't show a healthy white. They were stained with a muddy, jaundiced yellow, the unmistakable mark of a liver drowning in toxic buildup. He held his roasted oolong tea like a holy relic, the steam curling around a face that was gray with a fatigue no amount of sleep could cure. Across from him, Seo Yun was a study in dangerous perfection. She was a porcelain doll with a predator's pulse. Her smile was wide, bright, and reached absolutely nowhere near her eyes, which remained cold and observational. She adjusted her pearls with a grace that felt entirely rehearsed, her presence a sharp, jasmine-scented contrast to the man dying beside her. The two associates flanking them leaned in, their shoulders forming a wall of muscle and silk. They didn't even look at me as I drifted into their perimeter.
우리가 남이가 이번 일은 확실하게 처리해야 한대. 걱정 마 있어. 내가 알아서 할 테니까.
They were speaking the jagged guttural Saturi, the Busan dialect. It's a dialect of the docks, of the underworld, full of sharp glottal stops and rough vowels that hide secrets in plain sight. They thought their peasant tongue was a vault. They didn't know I'd spent years in the back alleys of Seoul and the ports of Busan, learning exactly how to listen to men who think they are alone. The dosage is increased tonight. The one with the scarred brow muttered in Saturi, his voice barely a vibration beneath the clink of silverware.
They are plotting your death.
The queen says he won't make it to the sunrise. The hitmen are positioned at the south gate, midnight sharp. When the lights go out, the king falls. Welcome back, my fierce hearts and midnight dreamers. Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed and hit that like button. I love seeing our little dark romance family stretch across the globe. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. As you know, our channel was recently demonetized, but we won't let that stop our stories. If you want to support us, check our Show Love page on Selar via the pinned link in the comments. Whether it's $5 or $150, every bit of love helps us keep these high-stakes betrayals coming. Now, find your quiet place, dim the lights, and let's see what happens when a waitress pushes back against a mafia king. Let's begin. I felt a surge of cold fury. I had seen this before back home in Uganda, the slow poisoning of leaders, the betrayal in the inner circle. It was a cowardly way to kill a man. I moved in, my movements fluid and invisible, timing my arrival for the exact moment Seo Yun leaned back to check her reflection in the polished silver of a serving tray. I reached for Dong-Jik's glass, the ice clinking softly against the crystal, a sound like breaking glass in a cemetery. I leaned in, ostensibly to wipe a drop of condensation from the tablecloth. My braids brushed my shoulder as I dipped my head low, positioning myself so my back blocked the associate's view of Dong-Jik's face. I didn't speak English. I didn't speak standard Korean. I spoke to him in the same raw, rhythmic Saturi his men were using to plot his end. "The queen is the assassin," I breathed, the Busan dialect rolling off my tongue like a dark warning. "The tea is the poison that swells your veins. The south gate at midnight is your grave." Don't go home, King. If you want to live to see your mother again, look at the bottom of the bill. I saw his body seize. It was a subtle internal jolt, as if a live wire had been touched to his spine. His pupils, pinpricks in that jaundiced yellow, snapped to mine. For a fraction of a second, the waitress was gone, and he was looking at a woman who saw through the mahogany and the money to the rot underneath. Seo Yun's head snapped toward us. "What is the delay?" she asked in English, her voice a sharp jasmine-scented whip. "We are leaving." "Just ensuring the gentleman's comfort, ma'am," I replied, my voice immediately shifting back to the submissive melodic tone of a servant. I pulled a leather check folder from my apron and placed it firmly in front of Dong-Jik. I had already prepared it. Inside, on the back of the receipt, I had scrawled in bold, black ink, "Your blood is screaming for help. She is feeding you the end. Run to the truth." I stepped back, merging once more with the background noise of the restaurant, the distant hum of conversation, the smell of expensive perfumes and charcoal-grilled meat. I began to walk away, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had done it. I had broken the silence. Now I just had to get out of the line of fire. I was 3 steps away when the world shifted. A hand shot out with the speed of a viper. It didn't just grab me, it anchored me. A grip of pure, forged iron clamped around my wrist. I was jerked backward so hard I nearly lost my balance. I turned, gasping, to find myself staring directly into the storm. Dong-Jik had lunged across the corner of the table, his chair screeching a high-pitched, agonizing protest against the marble floor. The contrast between us was violent. His skin was a dry, feverish furnace, the heat of his illness radiating through his palm and into my marrow. He was burning up, a man on the verge of a hypertensive crisis, his pulse thundering against my own skin. Against that terrifying, sickly heat, my own arm felt like marble, cool, steady, and unexpectedly strong. The restaurant went deathly quiet. The 2 associates were already halfway out of their seats, hands disappearing into their jackets, eyes fixed on me like wolves on a stray lamb. Seo Yun had stood up, her perfect face finally cracking, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and burgeoning rage. But Dong-Jik didn't look at them. He didn't look at his wife. He looked only at me. The leather folder was clutched in his other hand, crumpled under the force of his grip. His eyes, though clouded with toxins, were burning with a lethal mix of fury and dawning realization. He looked at me as if I were a ghost that had suddenly started screaming. "Who?" he demanded, his voice a low, guttural rasp that carried the weight of a death sentence. "Are you?" He didn't let go. His grip tightened, the iron heat of his hand branding my wrist, his eyes searching mine for the truth of the betrayal I had just laid bare. The silence in the restaurant didn't just break. It shattered like the expensive crystal on table 7. Dong-Jik's grip on my wrist was a brand of fevered iron, his breath hitching in a ragged, wet rattle that told me his lungs were beginning to struggle under the fluid buildup. His associates were no longer men in suits. They were statues of violence, their hands disappearing into the dark recesses of their blazers. Seo Yun's face had completely unraveled, the delicate socialite mask falling away to reveal a cold, clinical fury. "Dong-Jik, let the girl go," she commanded, her voice a sharp, jasmine-scented blade. "She's clearly touched. The stress of the dinner is making you hallucinate." He didn't look at her. His eyes, rimmed with that sickly jaundiced yellow, remained locked on mine. He was searching for a lie, but all he found was the steady, cool reflection of a woman who had seen the end of the world and survived it. "Move," he rasped, the Busan dialect thick and bloody in his throat. The scarred associate lunged forward. I didn't scream. Screaming is for victims, and in the kitchens of Kampala and the alleys of Seoul, I had learned that a waitress's greatest weapon is the weight of what she carries. I didn't pull away from Dong-Jik, I leaned into him, using his anchor-like grip to pivot. With my free hand I grabbed the heavy crystal pitcher of ice-chilled water and swung it in a violent arc. The water exploded across the scarred man's face, blinding him for the heartbeat I needed. As he stumbled, I shoved the heavy mahogany dessert trolley into the path of the second guard. The silver trays clattered, hot tea splashing across the floor, creating a slick, scalding barrier. "Run," I hissed at Dong-Jik. He didn't run. He lunged. Despite the tremors in his hands, the Mafia King moved with a residual predatory grace. He dragged me toward the kitchen exit, his boots skidding on the marble. Behind us, I heard the muffled thwip-thwip of suppressed gunfire, splintering the wood of the doorframe. The alleyway smelled of rain and old grease. An armored black sedan idling at the curb roared to life as we burst through the service entrance. Dong-Jik threw me into the back seat and collapsed beside me, the door slamming shut with the heavy, pressurized thud of a bank vault. "Drive," he choked out. The car fish-tailed, tires screaming against the wet asphalt. I looked at him in the dim, recessed lighting of the cabin. He was gray. The sweat was pouring off his forehead, soaking his silk shirt until it stuck to his chest like a second skin. His chest was heaving, each breath a frantic struggle. "Your heart," I said, reaching out to touch his neck. His pulse was a frantic, erratic hammer, at least 180 beats per minute. His blood pressure was peaking, a silent killer accelerated by whatever toxin Seo-yun had been laced into his daily life. "You're hypertensive. Your body is a pressure cooker about to blow." He slapped my hand away, but there was no strength in the gesture. "Who sent you?" "Nobody sent me, you stubborn fool," I snapped, my Ugandan accent bleeding through my Korean. "I'm the woman who clears your table. I'm the woman who sees the things your queen thinks are invisible." I grabbed his hand. The fingers were so swollen now he couldn't even make a fist. I could smell the copper in his breath. The poison is peaking. If I don't get him to a place where I can flush his system, he won't make it to the safe house. "Where are we going?" I demanded. "North," he whispered, his eyes fluttering. "The warehouse. The garden house. My mother. If we go to a hospital, they'll find you," I muttered to myself. "More than him. And if we go to your doctor, Seo-yun probably owns him. You need to stay awake, Dong-Jik. Look at me. Tell me about the garden." He didn't answer. His head fell back against the leather. The car swerved as a black SUV rammed our rear bumper. The metallic scream of grinding steel echoed through the cabin. Another ram. My head hit the window, a dull ache blooming behind my eyes. "They're gaining," the driver yelled from behind the partition. I looked at Dong-Jik. He was slipping away into a hypertensive coma. I grabbed his face, forcing him to look at me. "You don't die here. Not like this. Not while that woman is still smiling." I reached into my apron pocket. I always carried a small pouch of ginger and dried hibiscus, old habits from home. I pressed a piece of the pungent root against his lips. "Bite. The bitterness. Let it shock your nerves." He groaned, a low, guttural sound, and his jaw clamped down. The shock of the ginger seemed to tether him to the world for a few more minutes. We spiraled through the outskirts of the city, leaving the neon glow of the high rises for the jagged shadows of the industrial district. The driver pulled a hard right into a narrow gap between two shipping containers, then through a concealed gate that led to a modest, low-slung house hidden behind a wall of overgrown ivy. It wasn't a palace. It was a bunker dressed in brick and mortar. The car hadn't even fully stopped before the driver jumped out, helping me haul Dong-Jik's dead weight toward the door. He was a leaden mass of failing organs and fading will. The door creaked open, smelling of stale incense and medicinal herbs. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of old age and anxiety. A woman sat in the center of the room in a simple wooden wheelchair. This was Mama Kim. She didn't look like the mother of a billionaire. She looked like a woman who had spent a lifetime in the sun, her skin lined with 1,000 stories. Her hands, resting on a silk blanket, were gnarled and twisted by severe arthritis, the joints swollen into painful-looking knots. Her eyes, however, were as sharp as her son's. "Dong-Jik?" She cried out, her voice cracked and thin. We stumbled into the room, and I guided him down onto a low sofa. The moment his back hit the cushions, his eyes rolled into the back of his head. He went limp, his breathing turning into a shallow, terrifying rasp. "Dong-Jik." I shouted, slapping his cheek lightly to keep the blood moving. I felt a cold presence behind me. I turned my head just enough to see Mama Kim had wheeled herself closer. Despite her gnarled hands, she was holding a traditional Korean dagger, a jangdo, the blade gleaming with a wicked silver light in the dim room. Her face was a mask of suspicion and grief. She saw a stranger, a black woman in a stained waitress apron, hovering over her dying son in a secret house no one was supposed to know about. "Who are you?" she hissed, the blade trembling but aimed straight at my throat. "Did she send you? Did that devil woman send you to finish him?" I didn't back away. I couldn't. I had one hand on Dong-Jik's chest, feeling the erratic, dying gallop of his heart, and the other on his carotid artery. I looked at the old woman, looked at the pain in her eyes and the visible inflammation in her twisted fingers. I saw the same war being fought in her joints that was being fought in her son's blood. "I am the only one trying to keep him alive, Mama," I said, my voice steady, my eyes meeting hers with a truth that transcended language. "But looking at your hands, I realized we are both fighting a war against a body that's failing us." The metallic tang of the jangdo blade hovered inches from my throat, a silver sliver of distrust in the dim light of the safe house. Mama Kim's hand trembled, not from fear, but from the agonizing inflammation that turned her joints into knots of fire. "I am not the enemy, Mama," I said, my voice dropping into a low grounding hum. I didn't pull away from the knife. Instead, I reached out with slow, deliberate movements and placed my cool palm over her swollen, gnarled knuckles. "Your son is drowning in his own blood, and your hands are screaming. I have the keys to silence both. Lower the steel, or we both lose him tonight." The old woman's eyes searched mine, looking past the white apron and the Ugandan braids. She saw the steady light of a healer. Slowly, the dagger lowered. The tension in the room didn't vanish, but it shifted. It became a space of desperate necessity. "Hot water," I commanded, stepping into the role I had played long before I ever set foot in a Korean restaurant. "Clean towels. And bring me my travel bag from the car, the one with the green seal." The driver, a man named Jiro who looked like he'd seen 1,000 wars but was terrified of this one, scrambled to obey. Within minutes, the small kitchen was a makeshift apothecary. The air, previously thick with the scent of fear and stale incense, began to change as I opened my kit. I knelt beside Dong-Jik. His face was a mask of gray exhaustion, his breath coming in those terrifying wet hitches. I pulled out a bottle of HealthGuard Aloevite and a blister pack of Omega Plus. "His system is a clogged engine, Mama," I explained as I poured a measured dose of the dark, potent liquid into a cup of warm water. "Seo-yun didn't just give him a sudden poison, she gave him a slow death. She layered toxins into his food, thickening his blood until his heart had to hammer against stone. This Aloevite, it is the bitter grace of the earth. It will reach into his liver and pull the darkness out. It will flush the bile that has turned his eyes the color of old brass." I propped Dong-Jik's head up against my chest. He groaned, a sound of deep tectonic pain. "Drink, King," I whispered in his ear. "This is the soil of my home fighting the silk of yours." As he swallowed a reflexive primal gulp, I turned my attention to the woman in the wheelchair. She was watching me with a mix of awe and lingering pain. I could see the way she clutched her knees, the arthritis a constant thrumming thief of her peace. I pulled out the HealthGuard African potato extract and the joint support capsules. "In Uganda, we don't just treat the symptom, Mama, we treat the soul and the soil." I found these herbal wonders when my own mother's heart was failing, and her joints had turned to dry wood. "It's not magic, Mama. It's the earth reclaiming what the poison took. The African potato is a warrior. It reminds the body how to defend itself without attacking its own bones." I took a small amount of the herbal concentrate and began to massage it into her hands. The skin was paper thin, hot to the touch. I worked the cream into the swollen hinges of her fingers, my movements firm but tender. "I can feel the heat," she whispered, her Korean softening, the harsh Busan edges smoothing out. It feels like a warm rain is falling under my skin." "That is the inflammation retreating," I told her. The plants are speaking to your blood. They are telling it to cool down. For the next hour, the safe house became a sanctuary of sensory shifts. The sharp, medicinal scent of the herbs began to overpower the metallic smell of the guns Jiro was cleaning in the corner. The sound of the ticking clock was joined by the rhythmic, deepening breath of the man on the sofa. I moved between them like a weaver, tending to the son's internal war and the mother's external agony. I gave Dong-Jik another dose of the Omega Plus, explaining to the hovering Jiro that these golden capsules were like oil for the king's strained arteries, smoothing the path for his blood so his pressure wouldn't shatter his spirit. Slowly, the glow-up began. It started with Dong-Jik's complexion. The ashen, gray tint began to recede, replaced by a faint, healthy flush. The labored whistle in his chest quieted into a steady, resonant rise and fall. Beside him, Mama Kim was staring at her hands. She opened and closed them, slowly at first, then with a sudden fluid snap. A tear tracked through the deep lines of her face. "I haven't held a cup without shaking in 3 years," she breathed. She looked at me, and this time she reached out and touched my cheek. "You are not a waitress. You are a miracle wrapped in a white apron." "I am a woman who knows that nature never loses a fight if you give it the right weapons," I replied, finally allowing myself to sit back on my heels. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a hollow ache in my bones, but the satisfaction was a warm weight in my stomach. The room felt different now. The shadows weren't lurking, they were protective. The chill of the air had been replaced by a grounded herbal warmth. A low groan came from the sofa. Dong-Jik's hand twitched, then his eyes flickered open. He blinked, the overhead light reflecting in pupils that were no longer pinpricks of agony. He looked at the ceiling, then at the modest wooden beams of the safe house, and finally, his gaze settled on me. The yellow tint in his eyes had faded significantly, leaving the deep, stormy sea color I'd glimpsed briefly at the restaurant. He looked at his mother, seeing her upright, her hands resting peacefully in her lap, her face free of the grimace that had defined her for years. He realized then that the world hadn't ended at midnight. He didn't sit up with the violent jerk of a hunted man. Instead, he moved with a new, grounded strength, a vitality that didn't feel forced by adrenaline, but fueled by a clean fire. He looked at the empty health guard bottles on the table, then back at my face. I was covered in sweat, my apron stained with tea and herbal extracts, my hair a bit wild from the chaos. To the world, I looked like a mess. To him, I could see I looked like a queen. He reached out. This time, there was no iron in his grip. His hand was warm, a natural, living heat, and his touch was as light as a prayer. He took my hand in his long fingers wrapping around mine, and his thumb began to trace a slow, deliberate path across my palm. It was an intimate gesture, a recognition of the life I had breathed back into his lungs. He leaned forward, his voice no longer a deathly rasp, but a low, rich baritone that vibrated in the small room. "The Queen tried to bury me," he whispered, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "It seems she accidentally sent me to an angel who knows how to make the dead walk." I didn't pull away. I let his thumb trace the lines of my hand, the lines of a waitress, a polyglot, and a healer. The war wasn't over. Seo Yun was still out there, and the syndicate would be coming for the king. But as I looked at Dong-Jik's clear eyes and Mama Kim's steady hands, I knew one thing for certain. They weren't just fighting for an empire anymore. They were fighting for the woman who had saved it. The 4-no-am silence in the safe house wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the air before a tropical storm. Mama Kim was finally sleeping, her breathing a rhythmic, peaceful song I hadn't heard since we arrived. The kitchen was a cramped square of yellow light and the scent of singed spices. I had found a small stash of maize flour and kidney beans in the pantry, humble ingredients that, with the right touch of heat and memory, became a piece of home. Dong-Jik sat at the small wooden table, his silhouette cutting a sharp regained command against the peeling wallpaper. The gray pallor was gone, replaced by a bronze vitality that seemed to pulse under his skin. He watched me move, his eyes tracking the way I charred the onions, his gaze heavy and unblinking. You move like you're calculating the friction of the floor, he said, his voice a low, gravelly hum that vibrated in my chest. In my world, friction is the difference between a clean escape and a headline, I replied, not looking back. I plated the food, a simple, steaming mound of posho and beans, and set it before him. Eat. The health guard cleared the path, but your muscles need the fuel to walk it. He didn't pick up the fork. Instead, he reached out, his fingers brushing the back of my hand as I moved to withdraw. The contact was electric, no longer the searing, desperate heat of a dying man, but a slow, deliberate simmer. I wasn't surprised. Mirembe, he confessed, his voice dropping into a register of raw, intellectual vulnerability. The betrayal. I saw the signs months ago, the way the tea tasted like copper, the way my mind felt like it was wrapped in a wet wool blanket, a brain fog that made the simplest shipping manifests look like ancient hieroglyphics. I thought I was simply fading. I thought the Mafia King was finally being reclaimed by the dust. I pulled up a chair, sitting close enough that our knees almost brushed. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows across his face, highlighting the new clarity in his jawline. You weren't fading, Dong-Jik. You were being harvested, I said, my voice steady. I've watched men like you my whole life. You're too smart to be killed by a bullet that would leave a mess, a vacuum. Seo Yun didn't want you dead immediately. If she did, she would have used a sniper at the restaurant. No, she needed you compliant. She needed you weak enough to sign over the global port authority codes, but alive enough for the digital biometrics to work. You're not a husband to her. You're a high-security vault she's been slowly cracking for 6 months. He leaned back, a dark, appreciative smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. A waitress who understands biometric leverage in systemic poisoning. Tell me, Mirembe, where does a girl from Kampala learn to read the fine print of a syndicate execution? In the places where people think I'm part of the furniture, I whispered. I leaned in, the scent of the spices between us mixing with the faint, clean smell of the alovite still on his breath. The smart FL, that's what they call women like me in the stories, right? But this isn't a book. This is tactical. Right now, Seo Yun is celebrating. She thinks the king is in a ditch or a morgue. She has no idea I've been flushing your system with the Omega Plus and the African potato. She thinks you're a ghost. And me? To her, I'm just the black girl in the apron who disappeared in the chaos. I reached across the table, tapping the surface to emphasize my point. That is our greatest weapon. My invisibility. You stay here. You continue the regimen, double the joint support for your mother, and keep your blood pressure stable. I will go back into the city. I'll return to the Gilded Crane, or drift through the port. I speak the languages, Dong-Jik. I can sit in a corner with a mop and hear the exact coordinates of the rival syndicate's next move. I will be your eyes while you regain your teeth. The sexual tension in the room thickened, a tangible weight that made the air feel humid. Dong-Jik leaned forward, his face inches from mine. I could see the way his gaze dropped to my lips, lingering there as I spoke of infiltration and shadows. He wasn't just listening to the plan. He was fascinated by the mind that conceived it. He reached out, his hand sliding up my arm, his thumb tracing the crook of my elbow where the skin was sensitive. You're a dangerous woman, Mirembe Akello, he murmured, his breath warm against my skin. Not because you carry a blade, but because you know exactly where to whisper the truth to make an empire crumble. I'm a survivor, I corrected him, my heart hammering against my ribs, though my voice remained cool. And I don't like losing my best customers. He chuckled, a deep, rich sound that felt like a caress. He stood up, signaling for me to follow him to the small equipment bag Jiro had left by the door. He pulled out a slender, matte black device, a high-end military-grade earpiece, and a burner phone that looked like it cost more than my yearly tips. If you do this, he said, his expression turning solemn, you are no longer an observer. You are stepping into a legacy of blood and salt. The Kim family doesn't forget a debt, and they never let go of what is theirs. He stepped behind me. I felt the heat of his chest against my back, a solid wall of recovered strength. I didn't move as he reached around, his fingers nimble and steady. He tucked the tiny earpiece into my ear, his touch lingering on the shell of my ear, sending a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning chill. Then, he leaned down, his lips brushing the sensitive skin of my neck before he moved to my ear. He clipped a small, high-sensitivity microphone to the inside of my collar, his fingers grazing my collarbone. "You told me ears don't have a color. Mirembe," he whispered, his voice a dark promise that settled into my bones. "Tonight, mine will only listen for your voice. Go into the lion's den, but remember, the king is finally awake, and I'm hungry for more than just vengeance." I turned in his arms, our faces so close I could see the flecks of gold in his stormy eyes. The waitress was gone. The savior was gone. In that dim kitchen, as the sun began to bleed over the horizon, a partnership was born in the shadow of a throne. "Then stay hungry, Dong-Jik," I said, my voice a sultry challenge. "I'll bring you the queen's head on a silver platter. Just make sure you're ready to wear the crown when I get back." I pulled away, the weight of the tech in my ear a constant reminder of the high-stakes game we were now playing. I walked toward the door, not looking back, knowing his eyes were fixed on me until the shadows swallowed me whole. The air in the grand horizon gallery was thick with the scent of lilies and the ozone of high-voltage deception. It was a victory gala dressed in the black lace of a funeral. Hundreds of the city's elite drifted through the corridors, sipping champagne that cost more than my monthly rent, their laughter ringing like hollow crystal. They were here to mourn the missing Kim Dong-Jik, but the atmosphere was electric with the predatory energy of a changing tide. I moved through the crowd in a stiff black and white catering uniform, my movements synchronized to the frantic pulse of the service staff. In this world of silk and ego, a waitress is less than a person. She is a tray with legs. I was invisible, exactly where I needed to be. "Don't lean too far to the left, Mirembe. You're tilting. It's a tell." Dong-Jik's voice was a low, intimate growl directly against my eardrum. The earpiece was so small it felt like a part of my own body, his breath a phantom warmth in the chill of the gallery. He was miles away in the safe house, surrounded by monitors and shadows, but in my ear he was right behind me. "I'm fine, Dong-Jik," I whispered into my collar as I adjusted a platter of Wagyu beef tartare. "The queen is center stage. She looks like she's grieving, but her pearls are too tight. She's suffocating on her own triumph. Focus," he rasped. "Table 4. That's Director Choi. They call him the Snake for a reason. He sheds his skin every time the wind changes. He likes his scotch neat and his enemies dead. Don't look at him directly. His eyes are always hunting for a crack in the glass." I drifted toward the VIP lounge, my eyes cast down, noting the polished shoes and the hem of Seo-Yun's midnight blue gown. She was standing next to Choi, a man with a face like parchment and eyes that didn't seem to blink. They were projecting an image of corporate stability, but under the table I knew the daggers were drawn. The kitchen door swung open, and I retreated into the sanctuary of the catering prep area. The transition from the glamour of the gallery to the chaos of the kitchen was jarring. The air here smelled of searing fat, sharp vinegar, and the salt of hard labor. Near the industrial refrigerators, I saw Esther, a veteran server whose face was a map of 20 years in the hospitality industry. She was clutching a heavy silver tray of lobster thermidor, her face contorted in a silent grimace of agony. Her hands were shaking, the joints of her fingers red and angry. "Esther, let me," I said, sliding the tray from her hands before it hit the floor. "It's the cold. Mirembe," she hissed through gritted teeth, rubbing her gnarled knuckles. "The gallery's act is a curse on my rheumatism. My hands, they've turned to stone tonight." I looked at her, seeing the same fire that had tried to consume Mama Kim's peace. I reached into the hidden pocket of my apron, pulling out a small, unmarked vial I'd prepared from my health guard stash. I saw what this did for a woman who couldn't even hold a knife. "Esther," I whispered, pressing the health guard joint support concentrate into her palm. "It's the African potato. It's the warrior plant. Trust me, the Gemaster store saved her hands, and it can save yours." Rub it in now, before the next course. What is this? She asked, her eyes widening as she felt the immediate cooling sensation of the extract. It's the earth reclaiming your strength, I said, giving her a quick grounding squeeze on the shoulder. Keep it. Use it every morning. We weren't born to live in pain, Esther. Mirembe, get back to the floor. They're moving. Dong-Jik's voice snapped me back to the mission. I slipped back through the double doors, weaving through the silk-clad bodies until I was within earshot of the power table. I began refilling water glasses, my movements slow, my ears straining over the ambient violin music. Seo-Yun was leaning in close to Director Choi, her voice a sharp, jasmine-scented thread of malice. The digital signature is encrypted with a 3-factor biometric, Seo-Yun murmured, her eyes scanning the room. The shipping codes are useless without the physical verification. I have Dong-Jik's retinal scans from the hospital logs, but the final override, it's tied to his mother's pulse print. The old woman is the fail-safe. Choi took a slow sip of his scotch, his gaze fixed on the art on the far wall. Then why is she still breathing? My men have been tracking the driver's signal. We've narrowed the safe house to the industrial district. If the king is dead, the mother is just a key we need to turn. We move tonight, Seo-Yun said, her voice cold and final. A clean sweep. I want the biometric scan by 3:00 am. After that, burn the house. I want no trace of the Kim bloodline left in this city. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against the earpiece. My hand trembled, just a fraction, as I filled Choi's glass. A single drop of water splashed onto the table's white linen. Mirembe, keep your heart rate down, Dong-Jik cautioned, his voice a low vibration in my skull. I heard them. I'm already signaling Jiro. We need you out of there. Now. I turned to leave, but the air in the room suddenly felt too thin. Seo-Yun stood up, her gaze sweeping the perimeter of the lounge. Perhaps it was the way I moved, too steady, too purposeful for a waitress, or perhaps it was the ghost of a memory from the restaurant. Our eyes met. For one terrifying second, the world stopped. I saw the flicker of recognition in Seo-Yun's pupils, the sharp, sudden realization that the black woman in the catering uniform was the same one who had stood at the center of the chaos at the Gilded Crane. Her eyes narrowed, the queen sensing the spy in her court. She began to take a step toward me, her hand reaching for the small evening bag where I knew she kept her localized jammer and her tonic. Exit. Mirembe. To the service elevator, 3rd door on the right. Dong-Jik shouted in my ear, his voice no longer a growl but a command. I didn't run, running draws eyes. I pivoted, using a passing tray of champagne as a shield, and melted into the crowd of socialites. I moved with the invisibility of a shadow, slipping through the heavy velvet curtains that led to the service corridor. I didn't stop until I felt the cold air of the loading dock hitting my face. I leaned against the brick wall, my chest heaving, my fingers flying to the collar of my uniform. They're coming for your mother, Dong-Jik, I whispered into the microphone, my voice shaking with a mix of adrenaline and fury. The snake is heading for the garden, and he has no idea the lion is waiting in the grass. I see them on the perimeter. Mirembe, Dong-Jik's voice came through, now hard and lethal, stripped of all vulnerability. Let them come. I've had enough of the health guard tea to feel like a man again. Tonight, the garden becomes a graveyard. I looked out at the city lights, the shimmering deception of the skyline. The gala was still going on behind me, the music playing while the plotters toasted to their own demise. They thought they were the hunters. They thought they had seen the last of the king. I pulled off the catering cap, letting my braids fall free. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I was the bridge between a dying dynasty and its rebirth. I'm coming back to you, I said to the voice in my ear. I'm counting the seconds, he replied. The screech of stolen tires against the wet pavement was the only sound in the car, but in my ear, the world was ending. The earpiece was no longer a whispered intimacy, it was a broadcast of war. I could hear the rhythmic crump of flashbangs, the jagged rattling of suppressed submachine guns, and the terrifyingly calm melodic cadence of Dong-Jik's voice directing Jiro. 2 at the north perimeter, Jiro. They're moving in a standard pincer. They think I'm still in that bed, tethered to an oxygen tank and a dying liver. Let them get close. Let them get close enough to see my eyes. I pushed the accelerator to the floor, the engine of the hijacked sedan screaming in protest. The industrial district was a blur of gray concrete and rusted shipping containers. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, my heart hammering against my ribs, not with the erratic, sickly thrum of a victim, but with the steady, driving pulse of a soldier. Dong-Jik, I'm 4 minutes out. I shouted into my collar, dodging a delivery truck that honked in a panicked blare. Stay back, Mirembe. His voice snapped, momentarily losing its chill. The first wave is through the gate. Choi didn't send scouts, he sent a cleaning crew. This is a slaughterhouse. I don't leave my patients behind, I hissed, taking a corner on 2 wheels. The audio in my ear shifted. I heard the splintering of heavy oak, the front door of the safe house giving way. Then, a heavy silence, followed by the slow, arrogant footsteps of men who thought they were walking into a tomb. Inside the safe house, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and cordite. The lead hitman, a man with a neck like a bull and a jagged scar across his chin, kicked open the door to Mama Kim's bedroom. He held a silenced pistol leveled at chest height, his finger twitching on the trigger. He expected to see a withered woman cowering in a wheelchair. He expected the smell of sickness and the sound of weeping. Instead, the room smelled of African potato and sharp, cleansing herbs. Mama Kim was not in her chair. She was standing. Her legs were thin, and her frame was slight, but she stood with a verticality that defied her years. Her gnarled fingers, once frozen into claws of agony, were wrapped firmly around the hilt of the silver Django dagger. The inflammation that had kept her prisoner for a decade had retreated under the steady, relentless grace of the health guard regimen. Her eyes weren't clouded with cataracts or fear. They were bright with a terrifying ancestral fire. "Where is the king?" the hitman demanded, his confusion momentarily stalling his lethal intent. Mama Kim took a step forward, a real, fluid step. The silver of her blade caught the moonlight. "My son's friend gave me my strength back," she said, her voice no longer a cracked whisper, but a resonant bell. "You brought a gun to a house where the earth has already won. You are not hunting a dying man. You are trespassing in a lion's den." Behind the hitman, a shadow detached itself from the ceiling's darkness. Dong-Jik didn't move like a man who had been poisoned 3 days ago. He moved like a ghost made of muscle and vengeance. He didn't use a gun. He used the environment. He stepped into the light, his silk shirt unbuttoned, revealing a chest that was no longer heaving with hypertensive strain. His skin was clear. His movements possessed a terrifying hydraulic precision. He caught the hitman's wrist in a grip that would have shattered granite. The muffled thud of the silenced pistol firing into the floor was the only sound before Dong-Jik's palm struck the man's throat. It was a single, calibrated blow, the kind of strike only a man with perfect blood pressure and absolute focus could deliver. The hitman collapsed, a heap of useless meat. Dong-Jik didn't even look down. He turned to his mother, his eyes searching hers. "Are you steady, Mother?" "The joint support is holding, my son," she replied, her hand as steady as a surgeon's. "Deal with the rest. The girl is coming." I slammed the car into park just as the second wave of Choi's men began to converge on the house. I didn't have a gun, but I had a trunk full of heavy catering equipment I'd borrowed from the gala. I grabbed a heavy CO2 canister, the kind used for rapid chilling champagne, and sprinted toward the side entrance. The backyard was a graveyard of failed intent. 3 men lay incapacitated in the grass, handled by Jiro's clinical efficiency. I burst through the kitchen door, the air tasting of burnt ozone and the lingering earthy scent of the aloevite I'd used to flush Dong-Jik's system. I found him in the hallway. He was standing over a fallen intruder, his shirt torn open, his breath deep and resonant. The yellow tint in his eyes was completely gone, replaced by a clarity that was almost beautiful in its lethality. He looked up as I entered, and for a second, the Mafia King disappeared. replaced by the man who had sat across from me in the dim kitchen, fascinated by my mind. "You're late," he rasped, though his lips curved into a dark adrenaline-fueled smile. "I had to steal a better car," I panted, dropping the canister. I walked up to him, my hands instinctively going to his chest, checking the rhythm of his heart. It was a strong, steady drumbeat. No murmurs, no erratic skips. The Omega Plus had done its work. His cardiovascular system was a fortress. "Are you hurt?" He grabbed my wrists, his touch warm and vital. "I'm alive, Mirembe. Because of you." A sudden explosion rocked the house, a grenade at the perimeter gate. The windows rattled, and the scent of jasmine-scented smoke began to drift in. "That was the scout team," Dong-Jik said, his expression hardening. "Choi and Seo-yun are coming with the heavy hitters. They realize the poison failed. They realize the king is awake. They won't stop until this house is ash." He pulled me close, his chest heaving with the remnants of the fight. The heat radiating off him was a healthy, vibrant flame. He looked at me, really looked at me, not as a waitress who had overheard a secret, but as the architect of his resurrection. He saw the smudge of grease on my cheek and the fire in my eyes. "You brought the warning," he said, his voice dropping into that low, intimate register that made my skin tingle despite the chaos. "You saved my mother. You saved my life." He reached behind his back and pulled out a sleek, matte black Glock, pressing the cold steel into my palm. He wrapped his hand over mine, his fingers guiding my grip. "Now, Mirembe, help me take back my kingdom," he whispered against my temple, his breath a promise of war. "The waitress shift is over. The war queen has arrived." I looked at the weapon, then back at the man who had become my anchor in a world of sinking ships. I felt the strength in my own arms, the clarity in my own mind. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was the light that showed him where to strike. "Then let's go," I said, my voice as steady as his. "I have a few more things from the Gemaster store to show them, and I don't like people who try to burn down my safe houses." Outside, the roar of engines signaled the arrival of the main force. The snake was finally entering the garden, but as I stood beside Dong-Jik, I knew one thing for certain. He wasn't fighting a dying man. He was fighting a legend reborn. The Kim shipping port at 3 a.m. was a labyrinth of cold iron and dying echoes. Towering containers stacked 6 high loomed over us like steel giants, their corrugated skins rusted by decades of salt and diesel. The air was thick, a heavy, suffocating blanket of brine and industrial grease that stuck to the back of my throat. We moved through the shadows of the crane yard, a trio of ghosts. Dong-Jik led the way, his movements sharp, though I noticed the slight tremor in his hand as he gripped his side. The adrenaline was a jagged high, but the physical toll of the siege at the safe house was beginning to claw at his nervous system. "Wait," I whispered, pulling him into the sliver of darkness between 2 blue Myers containers. "We don't have time, Mirembe," he rasped, his eyes scanning the perimeter. The jaundiced yellow was gone, but a new exhaustion, a spiritual weight, was settling into the lines around his mouth. "The war isn't just fought with lead, Dong-Jik. It's fought in the nerves," I said, reaching into the hidden tactical pocket of my reinforced jacket. I pulled out a small, dark vial of Health Guard royal jelly and ginseng. "Your body is a temple, but even temples need a foundation when the earth shakes. Take this. Your focus is our only shield." He looked at the vial, then at me. Without a word, he downed the potent extract. I watched the transformation, the way his shoulders dropped, the way the frantic flickering of his eyelids smoothed into a predatory stillness. The ginseng was the spark, the royal jelly was the fuel. I could almost see his blood pressure stabilizing, his mind clearing of the combat-induced fog. "Better?" I asked. "Lethal," he replied, his voice a low, steady vibration. Behind us, Jiro stood in the shadows. He was silent, his head bowed, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. I attributed it to the sea breeze, to the steaks, to the smell of rust. I didn't realize it was the smell of a man who had already sold his soul to save his blood. The warehouse is just past the secondary terminal, Jiro muttered, his voice cracking like dry parchment. Choi is there. With the queen. The warehouse was a cavern of hollowed-out silence. We entered through the side-loading dock, the smell of old fish and stagnant water rising from the floorboards. It was too quiet. The kind of quiet that precedes a landslide. Something's wrong, I whispered, my hand going to the grip of the Glock Dong-Jik had given me. Jiro? Dong-Jik called out, his voice echoing off the high, corrugated ceiling. The heavy industrial doors behind us didn't just close. They slammed shut with the finality of a coffin lid. The hydraulic locks hissed into place, a mechanical death knell. Suddenly, the darkness was punctured, not by light, but by intent. Dozens of red laser sights blossomed across the room, dancing over the crates before converging on us. They dotted Dong-Jik's chest like a constellation of blood. Two settled on my forehead, cold and precise. Jiro walked away from us, his footsteps heavy. He didn't look back. He crossed the floor toward a raised catwalk where a figure stood, bathed in the harsh artificial glow of a spotlight. Seo-yun stepped forward. She looked like a black widow in a white silk suit, the pristine fabric a jarring contrast to the grime of the port. Flanking her was Director Choi, the snake, his face twisted into a smirk that didn't reach his lidless eyes. Jiro's daughter is safe, Director, a voice called from the shadows. Dong-Jik stood perfectly still. He didn't roar. He didn't plead. He looked at Jiro, a man he had treated like a brother, and saw the hollowed-out shell of a traitor. You should have told me, Jiro, Dong-Jik said softly. I would have burned the city to find her for you. I couldn't risk it, boss, Jiro whispered, his voice disappearing into the rafters. Seo-yun laughed, a sharp, melodic sound that grated against my nerves like a serrated blade. She looked down at me, her gaze sweeping over my tactical gear and the smudge of oil on my brow. Look at this, Seo-yun mocked, her voice dripping with aristocratic disdain. The peasant who played doctor. Did you really think some African herbs could stop a global takeover? You gave him a few extra days to live. Waitress. That's all. You polished the silver on a sinking ship. The herbs gave him the strength to stand while you were trying to bury him. I spat back, my grip tightening on the gun. You're not a queen, Seo-yun. You're a parasite. Seo-yun's face contorted. Kill her, she commanded, waving a bored hand toward the snipers. Wait. Dong-Jik's voice thundered through the warehouse, vibrating with the authority of the king he was born to be. He stepped in front of me, shielding my body with his own. You want the codes. You want the biometric override. You kill her, and I'll bite my own tongue off. You'll have a corpse and a worthless empire. Choi leaned over the railing, his eyes gleaming. He's right, Seo-yun. We need the retinal scan. And the pulse print. Surrender, Dong-Jik, Seo-yun hissed. Or I watch her bleed out on this floor. Dong-Jik looked at me. In the red glow of the laser sights, his eyes were a stormy, beautiful sea. He dropped his weapon. The hitmen swarmed us. I was slammed against a steel pillar, my arms jerked behind my back and bound with agonizingly tight zip ties. Dong-Jik was forced to his knees. A heavy boot caught him in the ribs, then another in the face. I screamed his name as blood sprayed across the concrete, the metallic tang of it filling the air. Seo-yun descended the stairs, a sleek, high-tech biometric scanner in her hand. It hummed with a predatory blue light. She grabbed Dong-Jik by the hair, yanking his head back to expose his face. His lip was split, his eye swelling shut, but he wasn't broken. Now, Seo-yun whispered, bringing the scanner inches from his face. The king finally opens his eyes for me. I struggled against my bonds, the plastic cutting into my wrists. I looked at Dong-Jik, desperate, waiting for the end. But as the scanner's red light began to sweep across his retina, Dong-Jik's gaze shifted to me. He didn't look like a defeated man. He looked like a man who had just played his final, winning card. Didario, he whispered in a thick, guttural Busan Saturi that only I could understand. Wait. The foundation is already shifted. The scanner emitted a harsh, piercing electronic wail. Access denied. Biometric mismatch. Seo-Yun froze. She shook the device, her face turning a panicked shade of pale. Impossible. These are your prints. This is your eye. She tried again. The machine shrieked. Mockdown. Unauthorized user detected. Dong-Jik started to laugh. A low, bloody chuckle that echoed through the dark warehouse. He looked Seo-Yun in the eye, blood dripping from his lip, and the sheer power of his presence made the armed men around him flinch. You studied my empire, but you never studied my savior, he said, his voice a jagged edge of triumph. Mirembe didn't just heal my body. She reprogrammed the vault. The transition was instantaneous and violent. One moment, the warehouse was bathed in the sickly clinical blue of the failed biometric scanner. The next, it was a tomb of absolute, suffocating darkness. The high-pitched shriek of the system lockdown was the only thing filling the void, a mechanical scream that tore through the arrogance of the men surrounding us. I felt the shift in the air, the sudden, frantic intake of breath from the hitmen, the panicked clack-clack of safety catches being thumbed off in the blind. To them, the dark was a predator. To me, it was the white apron I'd worn for years, my invisibility made absolute. Lights. Get the damn emergency lights on. Seo-Yun's voice was no longer a jasmine-scented whip. It was a jagged glass edge, vibrating with the first tremors of true terror. I didn't waste a heartbeat. While they scrambled for flashlights that wouldn't turn on, and radios that were hissing with dead static, I moved. My wrists were raw where the zip ties bit into the flesh, but I hadn't spent a decade in the service industry without learning how to palm a tool. Tucked into the waistband of my tactical trousers was a heavy, professional-grade wine key, a solid piece of forged steel with a serrated foil cutter and a corkscrew sharp enough to puncture leather. I didn't pull away from the pillar. I leaned into the guard who was still holding my shoulder. In the pitch black, I could smell the cheap tobacco on his breath and the sour sweat of his confusion. I twisted my body, the zip ties snapping as I used the leverage of the steel pillar to force the plastic against its breaking point. The moment my hands were free, I didn't reach for his gun. I reached for his throat. I drove the serrated edge of the wine key into the soft meat of his forearm, the sudden, wet gasp he let out lost in the mechanical roar of the lockdown sirens. As he stumbled, I stripped the tactical flashlight from his belt and used the heavy base of it to crack his temple. He went down like a sack of grain. I didn't turn the light on. I didn't need to. I tracked the sound of Dong-Jik's breathing, a low, rhythmic growl that cut through the chaos. Dong-Jik, I hissed, my voice a ghost in the dark. Here, Mirembe, he replied. His voice was steady, a miracle of physiological resilience. I crawled toward the sound, my hands finding his chest. He was warm, his heart a steady, defiant drum against my palm. I felt a surge of professional pride through the adrenaline. Any other man, beaten and poisoned as he had been, would have gone into neurogenic shock the moment the lights failed. But the Health Guard Foundation was holding. The Omega Plus had kept his arteries flexible, allowing his heart to pump through the stress without snapping under the pressure of the hypertensive spike. His system was a fortress I had rebuilt stone by stone. He wasn't just surviving, he was ready. The zip ties, he whispered. I sliced through the plastic on his wrists with the wine key. He stood up, the movement fluid and silent, a king reclaiming his height in the kingdom of the blind. They're heading for the catwalk, he breathed, his hand finding mine. His grip wasn't desperate. It was a partnership of steel. Seo-Yun won't leave without the override. We moved through the warehouse like twin shadows. The hitmen were firing blindly now, the muzzle flashes illuminating the rusted containers in strobe like bursts of violence. We didn't fire back. We used the towering steel giants as shields, circling the perimeter until we reached the industrial stairs leading to the upper gallery. The emergency red lights finally flickered to life, dim, pulsing glows that turned the warehouse into a scene from a fever dream. Seo-Yun was at the edge of the catwalk, her white suit stained with the grime of the port, her hair a wild halo of silver. She was screaming into a radio, her face a mask of hysterical rage. Director Choi stood beside her, his snake eyes darting toward every shadow, his suppressed pistol shaking in his hand. "Where are they?" Seo-yun shrieked. "Find them and kill them. I want their heads on the floor before the sun rises." "The sun isn't coming for you today, Seo-yun." My voice rang out from the top of the stairs. She spun around, her eyes wide with shock. Dong-Jik and I stepped into the red light. I held the wine key like a dagger, and Dong-Jik stood beside me, his silhouette a towering promise of retribution. Director Choi raised his weapon, his finger tightening on the trigger. He had the clear shot. He had the tactical advantage. He looked at me, a cruel smirk twisting his parchment-like skin. "Goodbye, Waitress." Suddenly, the silence was punctured. Not by a gunshot, but by the mundane, high-pitched trill of a cell phone. Choi froze. The sound was coming from his own pocket. It was a private line, the one he used for his family. He hesitated, the professional killer warring with the father, before he answered. He put it on speaker, his eyes never leaving us. "Hello?" He rasped. "The garden is beautiful this morning, Director Choi," a voice said. It wasn't a man's voice. It was a resonant, melodic bell. "Mama Kim." "I am sitting here with Jiro," she continued, her voice steady and full of a power that transcended her years. "And I am looking at your wife and your 2 daughters. They are drinking tea. It is a very special tea, the aloevite and ginseng Mirembe left for me. It is helping them stay calm, while Jiro explains that their lives now depend entirely on whether you drop your weapon." Choi's face went gray. "Jiro? You traitorous dog." Jiro didn't flip, snake. Dong-Jik's voice was a low, lethal baritone. "He played the only hand a father has. He led you here so my mother could secure the only leverage you understand. You thought he was your pawn. He was my Trojan horse." The gun slipped from Choi's fingers, clattering onto the metal grate of the catwalk. He backed away, his hands raised, his eyes fixed on the phone as if it were a ticking bomb. Seo-yun was alone. She backed away from us, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm against the edge of the catwalk. Below us, the warehouse floor was a sea of shadows and fallen men. She looked at Dong-Jik, then at me. Her queen persona was gone, replaced by the raw, panicked desperation of a cornered animal. "You think you've won?" she hissed, her voice cracking. "I have the syndicate. I have the resources. You're nothing but a dying man and a servant." I stepped forward, the red light catching the silver of my wine key. I looked her in the eye, the black widow in her white suit, the woman who thought she could buy the soul of a king with poison and pearls. "You saw a dying man because you wanted his throne," I said, my voice dropping into a sultry, dangerous hum. "You saw a servant because you're too blind to see the power of the soil. You thought the king was your prisoner, but you forgot one thing. A king is only as strong as the woman who keeps his heart beating. And I'm much more than a waitress." I took another step, and Seo-yun's foot slipped on the edge. She teetered, her arms flailing, looking down at the dark abyss of the warehouse floor. Dong-Jik reached out, not to save her, but to catch my hand, pulling me into the warmth of his side. The war queen and the king stood together, looking down at the ruin of a betrayal that had failed to take root. "The shift is over, Seo-yun," Dong-Jik whispered. "And the tip is your life." The warehouse didn't end in a spray of bullets. It ended in the cold, pressurized silence of an empire resetting its bones. Seo-yun was still screaming as the internal security forces, men who had once bowed to her, now looking at her with the revulsion one reserves for a common thief, marched her toward the black SUVs waiting at the dock. She had tried to steal a kingdom with a dropper of poison, but she had forgotten that a kingdom is built on loyalty, not just leverage. Director Choi, the snake, sat slumped against a shipping container, his phone still clutched in his hand. He wasn't dead, but in our world, being stripped of your family's safety and your digital credentials is a fate far more permanent than a grave. Dong-Jik didn't need to pull a trigger. He simply revoked Choi's existence from every server in the hemisphere. "It's over," I whispered, the salt spray of the harbor cooling the dried blood on my cheek. Dong-Jik turned to me. The dawn was beginning to bleed over the horizon, painting the steel cranes in shades of bruised purple and gold. He didn't look like a man who had just survived a coup. He looked like a man who had finally found his breath. 2 weeks later, the safe house was no longer a bunker. It was a sanctuary. The scent of jasmine was gone, replaced by the deep, grounding aroma of HealthGuard African potato and fresh ginger. I stood in the sun-drenched garden watching Mama Kim. She wasn't in her wheelchair. She was standing by the hydrangea bushes, her back straight, her gnarled hands moving with a fluid rhythmic grace as she clipped the spent blooms. "Steady, Mama," I said, stepping onto the grass with a tray of fresh alevite tea. She turned, and the smile on her face was a masterpiece of restoration. She walked toward me, not a shuffle, but a deliberate, painless stride. She took the cup from me, her grip firm and warm. "I'm not just walking, Mirembe," she said, her voice resonant and clear. She reached out and squeezed my forearm, her fingers strong. "I'm running the charity wing now. We're setting up the first urban wellness clinics. The African potato gave me my legs, but you gave me my life. You saw a woman where everyone else saw a ghost in a chair. Nature just needed an invitation to heal you, Mama," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. "No," she corrected, looking toward the house where Dong-Jik stood in the doorway, watching us. "Nature provided the tools, but it took a queen to know how to use them." That evening, Dong-Jik took me back to the very edge of the port, to the highest point of the primary terminal. The city lights were beginning to flicker on, but the harbor was his, a vast, silent engine of global trade. He didn't pull out a ring. He pulled out a sleek, titanium tablet. Seo Yun spent 6 months trying to crack the master code, he said, his voice a low, sultry baritone that vibrated against my shoulder as he stood behind me. She wanted the key to the shipping manifests, the deep sea vaults, and the private ledgers. He slid the tablet toward me. The screen glowed with a prompt for a new administrative override. "I've wiped the old system," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "The new security protocol for the entire Kim global empire is live. It's no longer a biometric scan of a dying man. It's a keyword. A legacy." I looked at the screen. The new master code stared back at me in bold, flickering pixels. Akello 01. "You gave me my name back, Dong-Jik," I said, turning in his arms. "No," he said, his stormy eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made the world fall away. "I'm giving you the keys to the kingdom you saved. You're not the woman behind the throne, Mirembe. You are the throne. From now on, nothing moves in this harbor without your breath on it." He leaned in, his lips brushing mine with a promise that wasn't about business. It was about a restoration of the soul. 6 months later, the boardroom of Kim Global Holdings was a fortress of glass, mahogany, and outdated masculine ego. 12 directors sat around the table, their tailored suits worth more than a village, their faces etched with a skepticism that bordered on hostility. "With all due respect, Chairman," Director Park said, his voice dripping with condescension as he looked at the empty seat at the head of the table. "The rumors of a new partner, a woman from the service sector, it's making the shareholders nervous. We are a shipping empire, not a hospitality suite." The heavy double doors at the end of the room swung open. I didn't enter with a tray. I didn't enter with a smile. I walked in wearing a custom-tailored emerald green power suit that complemented the deep bronze of my skin. My braids were pinned back in a sharp architectural crown. The room went silent, the kind of silence that happens when a predator enters a room full of scavengers. I didn't sit down. I walked to the head of the table and leaned forward, my hands flat on the polished wood. "Director Park," I said, my voice a cool melodic hum. I shifted effortlessly into the sharp, guttural Saturi of Busan, the dialect of the docks, the language they thought I was too foreign to understand. "I've reviewed your department's logistics. You're losing 4% of your margin on wastage in the southern terminal. Perhaps if you spent less time worrying about the service sector and more time watching your own books, I wouldn't have to replace you by Monday." Park's jaw dropped. The other directors shifted in their seats, their eyes wide. They weren't looking at a waitress. They were looking at a shark. Our new direction is clear, I continued, switching back to flawless, commanding English. Kim Global is no longer just moving steel and oil. We are moving life. Our primary focus for the next fiscal year is the holistic wellness and global distribution of herbal alternatives. We have finalized a permanent partnership with the Health Guard and Gemister networks. We are bringing the Ugandan miracle to the global stage. I looked around the room, my gaze stopping at each man until they lowered their eyes. The chairman is alive today because of the earth, not the pharmacy, I said, my voice firm. We are going to give the world the same restoration. Any director who finds herbal alternatives to be beneath our brand is welcome to leave their keycard on the table today. At the far end of the table, Dong-Jik sat. He wasn't the exhausted man I had met 6 months ago. He was radiant, his skin glowing with the vitality of the Omega Plus and Royal Jelly regimen I still oversaw personally. He didn't say a word. He simply watched me, his chin resting on his hand, a look of pure, unadulterated mesmerization on his face. He wasn't the king protecting a girl. He was a man worshipping a goddess. The meeting adjourned in a flurry of panicked nodding and respectful bows. As the directors filed out, Dong-Jik stood and walked toward me. He didn't stop until he was in my space, his hand sliding around my waist, pulling my back against his chest. "You handled Park better than I would have," he whispered, his voice a dark, appreciative rumble. The Saturi was a nice touch. I think he actually paled. "He was loud," I said, leaning my head back against his shoulder. "I don't like loud men. They miss the details." "And what do you see now, Queen of the Port?" I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below us, the harbor was humming. My harbor. The ships were moving, the cranes were swinging, and the crates filled with the healing power of the soil were heading out to a world that desperately needed to wake up. I thought back to that night at the Gilded Crane. The clink of the glasses, the smell of the poisoned tea, and the way I had felt so small in that white apron. I smiled. I used to be the woman who refilled your water while you plotted. Now I'm the woman who owns the water, the port, and the man who runs it. And trust me, I'm still listening.